lecture. Today it's been 14 years of his demise, and uh, Speleological Association of India is very proud to conduct this event. So, what is Speleological Association India? I'll just give you a small introduction to the organization since it is a budding organization, just registered, not even 2 years completed. So, Speleological Association of India is dedicated towards conservation of cave and casts in the Indian subcontinent, the research and conservation. So, it's basically the organization's objectives are doing scientific explorations, conducting studies, research, protection and conservation, and advocacy of the subterranean and other related systems, ecosystems, flora, fauna in Indian subcontinent. And the organization also has an objective towards awareness, education, training, ownership, and stewardship of this habitat. Uh, uh, Speleological Association of India has recently partnered with the International Union of Speleology last year in July when the International Congress was conducted. The organization is now considered as a India representative in UIS, and the association recognizing the association has recognized me to be an representative of India through the organization. So I am the India representative in the International Union of Speleology, and actually the UIS had a International Year of Cave and Cast in 2021, but because of COVID, they postponed. They extended for one more year, and this 2 years of International Year of Cave and Cast was very successfully celebrated by Speleological Association of India by conducting various education awareness programs and webinars, and also featuring many of the people as troglodytes. Our recent one of our recent troglodytes was Dr. Ravi Shankaran, uh, because of his contribution towards research of caves and cave animals in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. He was the pioneer person who initiated the cave work in the Andaman Nicobar Islands, right from identifying the cave locations and initially mapping their locations and starting a conservation program for the edible nest cryptid, which is a cave dwelling bird, which later on led to several cave related studies, and is a foundation for many cave related studies ongoing right now. So in his dedication, even today we have a event remembering him after 14 years of his demise. And uh, like International Year of Cave and Cast, the Biology Commission of International Union of Speleology has a program of International Cave Animal of the Year. The first International Cave Animal of the Year was beetles, which was celebrated across the globe. And right now we are celebrating bats as the international cave animal across the globe because of the various different type of ecosystem services provided by bats, and being one of the dominating taxa living using the caves. And I won't talk much about this because we have a very eminent speaker with us, Dr. Sanjay Molur, who is a bat expert and also related to Dr. Ravi Shankaran. So that's why the association thought maybe he's the best person to speak about it, because he can connect us with Dr. Ravi Shankaran and also speak about something which is considered as the international cave animal, the bats. So, in short, there is a big list to talk about Sanjay Mulur, and like in short, if I tell about him, which people can immediately pick up is he is the executive director of Zoo Outreach Organization. He is also a founder secretary of Wild Information License Development. He is also founder and chief editor of Journal of Threatened Taxa and Zoo Sprint. He is a course director of currently ongoing Hatikudur Advanced Training in Conservation. Here I have just put two things in a slide because I don't want to make many slides, but then he is part of many commissions, he is part of many planning groups, he is part of many policy making groups related to Species Survival Commission and IUCN. He represents Asia in the primate groups, he represents Asia in amphibian and reptile group. He is involved in lot of different type of policy making issues, different type of the involving people into conservation and various conservation aspects he works on and he is involved in it. I'm very thankful to Dr. Sanjay Molu for accepting this. Sanjay, thank you very much. And I request Sanjay to please enlighten us about the bats, the cave dwelling bats, and the things related to them. So, Sanjay, please, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Shirish. Am I audible?
So, I'll stop presenting so Sanjay can start presenting here.
Hi, Shirish. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. Thank
Am I
you.
audible?
Yes, you are.
Well, that's a very quick and uh, best introduction I've heard so far. So thank you very much. Um, very nicely put.
Thank you.
Although it's all because of the teamwork that I represent the organization, and all of these different things. It's my team that's with me, and so without them, I wouldn't be doing any of this. So what I'd like to do is perhaps share a couple of reasons why Shirish got me to be the first speaker here. It's been 14 years and counting, and in the sense that it came as a shock, obviously, to all of us when we heard Ravi pass away that morning of the fateful morning of 17 January 2009. Um, Little did we expect such a thing to happen, but yeah, it did. And then a whole lot of conservation efforts and conservationists were impacted by his loss, and we still seem to be. But in a typical Ravi Shankaran way, I would also say that being a very close friend of his for several years with of his and his family, Deepa and Yamini, um, we spent a lot of time together and had our own set of arguments and controversies and everything else that we used to put out there. The best part was that we never hid anything from each other in terms of how we felt about what the other was doing, how we felt about how conservation was working in India or not working in India, and how basically everything else. The point was we used to get into real fights, but also get out of it really soon and move on with things. And as we did then, I'd like to move on because I'm sure Ravi also wouldn't want to dwell on some of his let me yeah on the sad parts or anything. So I'm not going to talk anything more about Ravi because I think the best person to talk about him is Shirish. Let me just try and get this presentation up and going. Okay. So is the screen visible? Can
Yes, sir.
someone?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
visible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. I'd like to start off with a few species of bats that are not necessarily cave living, but enough to start off with things that occur in our daily lives. The the beautiful species that you see here is the one of the common greater Asiatic yellow bats, which is a species found everywhere throughout India and in other parts of the world, in Southeast Asia also. The species is usually found, behind our photo frames or in the crevices of eaves and other places. It's it's a very nice species if you actually get hold of it. Uh, Behaves very differently. Sometimes extremely territorial, sometimes very aggressive. It lives singly or in pairs. We have the tombat again, a beautiful looking species, uh, which is found throughout the country again. Not necessarily a cave species, but there are a few that occur in caves. It has wonderful features and characters that one would identify with, especially in the drier areas. But one of my favorites is the more common pipistrelle, which again is found in many parts of Southeast and Southern Asia. In India, we have several different kinds of pipistrelle species. The one that is most commonly found is Pipistrellus tenuis, which is the tiniest of pipistrelles. It's one of the smallest mammals. Weighs only about 1.5 grams. The adult male, the female sometimes weighs only about 1.2 grams. And the beautiful thing about this species, it's commonly found, occurs um, around lampposts, eating mosquitoes and other flies. It eats up to 300 mosquitoes in an hour and is active for several hours in a night. So it's a very good species to have around our houses. Similarly, you have other uh, lovely insect bats. This is a Hesperoptinus tickli, tickles bat, which is again found in various different uh, places. It's not that very common, but if you really go looking for it, you might be lucky to find a few. The reason why I introduced these are these were these are bats that live in amongst us. These are bats that live close to human habitation or even in forests, not necessarily caves. And something that we all as conservationists do, live gregariously, have a social life, live with other human beings. And why not start with that? Because with Ravi Shankran gone, and this being a commemorative uh, talk, I thought I would like to introduce Ravi from the perspective of how gregarious and social he was. And he really lit the light and was a cynosure in any meeting, formal or informal. He had a way about him that touched many people in various different ways in terms of uh, perhaps enjoying a drink with him or a smoke, or even having a nice talk about his conservation work or anything that's happening around the country. Uh, some of the common refrains were his rides on camels in the Thar Desert, or his search for the lesser floricon, or about the great Indian bustard, when he was not talking about the edible nest swiftlets and his work in the caves in Andaman. We had our differences initially in terms of the way he was approaching conservation and I was, just like the greater conservation world that is always at sparring with each other. We used to spar, but eventually we sort of found a middle ground where we learned from each other. I must say, I learned a lot more from him because he was there doing this stuff and working with communities and uh, doing the stuff that nobody else in India at that point in time was doing successfully. And that is what Ravi was all about in terms of his bringing together his social skills and involving people and communities, living with them, working with them, and getting to know them before involving them completely in a conservation effort. And I can go on, but I think I'll just move on from here because Ravi worked in caves, and I'd like to introduce you some of the species that he was very interested in of bats. He was not just interested in edibleness, swiftlets, but of other creatures too. So I've called this dark and scary for a reason, only because to the layman, a cave is dark and it is scary. A lot of people go with torches. A lot of people are uncomfortable in dark spaces. Um, but it's not the case. It's not really scary. It's dark, yes. But if you can find a way, if you can let your eyes adjust to the darkness, it's a wonderful ecosystem. And I'm sure many of you have been in caves and have explored them. But if you haven't, please give it a try. My talk here is on the future of cave bats, mainly because of how we in India are accustomed to looking at cave bats, what we do with them, and what is generally happening to them. And I'd like to take you through stories of my own experiences and others. I'm obviously not a, a completely cave bat expert. There are many other experts in India, and it'd be good to hear from them also. But I like to stitch the stories together to tell the story of the species and its habitat it lives in. So I'll make this attempt of stitching together some of my own experiences with others, and let's see how it goes. One of my first bats that I saw in a cave in Andhra Pradesh near Rolapadu Wildlife Sanctuary was this dog-faced fruit bat, Rusetus leschnolti. It's a very widely distributed species found everywhere. It has a very unique behavior. It clicks sort of to echolocate, but basically it's trying to find fruits on a tree, and that's what it goes after. It's usually a solitary bat, but when you go to certain caves, when you see some caves, explore some caves, like I have in, say, in the Eastern Ghats or in the Western Ghats, I've found thousands of them living together. And it's a sight to watch them all fly out as they exit in the evenings. The species is widely distributed. It's least concerned species on the IUCN red list. But as for any cave system, I think we need to start looking at caves in a better way to understand what exactly the situation is with respect to such cave bats. The lesser false vampire bat, along with the greater false vampire bat, the two false vampire bats in India, carnivorous bats, Megadama spasma in this case, and its bigger brother, Megadama lyra, are again cave living, or they live in human habitation, sometimes in tree hollows also. But these bats are again very social. They live in huge numbers, not really large. In caves, you find them in larger numbers, but in other places, in human habitations and others, you'll find fewer in number. But they also try and occupy any tree hollows if available. Very nice bats, very cute looking bats, not at all dangerous. If anybody is thinking that there are blood sucking bats and therefore this species and its brother are called vampire bats, please set them aside. Those are not true of this and the other species. We do not have any blood sucking bats in India. These bats feed on smaller mammals perhaps, and frogs, and some insects. And they fly very close to the ground, hunting for their food. You might have come across, if you step into the forest sometimes, you might come across something hitting your leg once in a while. That need not be somebody throwing a stone at you or so, but it could be a megadama trying to locate its prey and getting distracted and running into you or flying into you. So these are really interesting species, cave bats. Something, again, we need to understand what really is happening to them and what's happening to their cave systems. Moving on, this is a species that I recorded in Makuta in the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary in Coorg when I was doing my PhD on rodents and bats. This particular species was the only one that was in a subterranean cave. As we entered this cave, crawled into it, the roof was not very high. I was just barely able to stand. Most of the bats had exited because of our getting into the cave, but there were a few hanging around. And I noticed this fellow, fairly docile, did not move around, and perhaps he had some kind of disease or something, so he was not very active. He also had a lot of fleas on him. The interesting part of this particular subterranean cave system in Makuta is that the caves are not very large. They have very small openings on the sides of these hill slopes. You enter the small opening, it opens into a larger cavern. But there are many such caverns distributed along the length and width of the Makuta forest. And each of these caverns are connected by small water drains. And these drains are really very, very important for these bats because that's their escape route. And so they get out of those water pipes, literally, underground water drainages, and come out to another cavern. And that's how they escape from their predators, or humans in this case. And there are a series of these caverns that are open, and you can see a lot of these bat activities moving between these caverns using these drainages. Very, very interesting. You can't actually get into those drainages because those water drainages are really, really small. But you do find other biodiversity in them, including some crabs and scorpions and millipedes and cockroaches and different kinds of insects and invertebrates. This species, a beautiful specimen here, is actually a pregnant female. She was hanging just outside of the mouth of the cave in one of those Makuta caves. The lesser woolly horseshoe bat, again, is widely distributed within the Indian subcontinent, but again, not very commonly seen because it's mostly a cave-dwelling species. It's interesting also to see that some individuals roost at the opening of the cave, not all deep inside. And this was one of them. And she allowed me to get very close to her. I'm not into handling bats, especially the wild ones, so didn't get anywhere close, but I was close enough to photograph her from 360 degrees. And she was there, and I could see that she was carrying a full term. And so it was a very, very interesting sight to watch her and to see other individuals of her own species just inside the lip of the cave. Again, you see many parasites on her. And this is one of the common features in all cave bats, is that you get to see a lot of parasites on them. Different kinds, different colors, beautiful. And they're all over the place. And because they're all cave dwelling, the bats, they pass on these parasites generously to each other. Moving from there, Another interesting cave species, I don't know what species this is. It's a Hippocedrus, it's a leaf-nosed bat. I'm not been able to find it again, uh, not been able to identify it properly because the camera angle was not good enough to identify the cella, which is one of the characteristics, or rather not in this, it's uh, the other uh, leaf nose features and the folds around the mouth that are not very clear in this, that I couldn't identify it properly. But the interesting behavior of this particular species is the species calls was, at least at that point in time when I was recording it using a bat detector, it was calling at 80 kilohertz and constant at that. And it really surprised me because usually Hippocedrus and Wranglophytes call at a very high frequency, higher than 120 perhaps. But this one was calling at 80. And I was wondering what exactly they were doing. There were about 6 or 7 of them. They used to come out, hang on this particular wall, call continuously, and then stop calling, take off, go around a huge banyan tree, come back, and when they came back and clawed back on the wall, we could see them eating some insect or the other. Very interesting behavior, at least for me, because I always thought that insect bats echolocated and looked for their prey with echolocation as they flew, and then caught them in midair, chewed them, swallowed them, and went on doing the same thing until they had their fill or until they were active through the night. But this particular species used to come back, hang on the wall, call out at 80 kilohertz, stop, take off, go around the tree, find its prey, come back and eat it. And it did this for at least 2 or 3 hours in the night. And it was a very, very interesting behavior. So if anybody else knows about such a behavior, I'd love to hear from you. There are other species that I haven't actually recorded or seen, would love to see them sometime, but I've taken the liberty of borrowing these photographs from different people on the internet, and in this case, thanks to Kalyan Verma, of the Rowton's free-tailed bat, Automops rotani, a unique species, one of its kind in the country, used to be found only in a single cave in Belgaum in northern Karnataka. The species numbered anywhere from, say, 500 to 50, depending on the counts, depending on the time of the year, depending on who went and counted, depending on where they counted within the cave, and all that. There were some threats to the species because there are a lot of people who'd go into the cave, and there were a lot of people who'd collect this for scientific purposes also. Eventually, that reduced, and the species perhaps is doing better nowadays. The species also occurs in a reserve forest now. So the Baripada cave occurs in the reserve forest in Belgaum. And so the number of visitors to this cave has hopefully reduced. And the impacts on this cave has hopefully reduced. This particular species, however, is a species that occurs in the interiors of the caves. You don't find it near the opening. It doesn't occur just hanging around in any of the deep sections of the cave. It likes to live in the crevices of the caves. So you actually really have to go looking for it, and it's found in the crevices. It usually likes that small, tiny spaces. And it gets agitated really fast. This particular species, when it was assessed in 2001, we had just the knowledge of its occurrence in one cave. And so because of all the different threats to the species, it was assessed as critically endangered in 2001. However, in the same year and in the next year, there were other studies that indicated a single individual of the same species, perhaps the same taxon, was found in Siju Cave in Meghalaya and also in Cambodia. And these were really occasional luck by chance sightings, which were identified as Automorphs rotani. So what we knew of a species occurring in a single cave in Belgaum suddenly had this wider distribution in northeastern India and in southeastern Asia, which made the assessment really confusing. So what it taught us is that we still don't know much about this particular species. Perhaps it is found in other caves in between these different locations. Perhaps it is not, but we don't know enough at this point in time to actually call it a critically endangered species. And so in the next set of assessments, it was categorized as data deficient. So one of the important things with the IUCN red listing process is when you get into this issue of categorizing something from critically endangered to data deficient, does not mean to say that you are downlisting the species. It's not a least concern species. It is data deficient because for want of more information. And that we got because of these occasional sightings that were provided by different authors. But the point is that data deficiency also means that a species could be threatened. So it has to have the same value. The category data deficiency or data deficient has to be of the same value as any threatened species. So if you want to still consider it as a critically endangered species, one could easily do so. However, it is data deficient from the IUCN red list point of view. Okay, so that's a very interesting aspect of this particular species. It's a unique example where it gave us a reason to push something from being threatened to data deficiency. Again, I've never seen this bat. It's the Salim Ali's fruit bat, found in southern India, in Tamil Nadu, and in certain parts of Kerala. Again, a cave species. It was confused for a very long time for a Sinopterus species until it was described as a new species in 1971. It could easily be confused for, like I said, the Sinopterus, but it has its own morphological uniqueness that makes it very different. And this particular species again occurs in various different caves. Fortunately, many of those caves are protected in protected areas. And so we hope they are not as threatened as some of the other cave dwelling species of bats. This is a beautiful drawing by Arnab Roy from West Bengal, who has actually drawn quite a few bats. And in our collection of 118 bats in those days, most of them are well represented. Of course, the number of bat species now has gone up. So thanks to him, we've got good illustrations of many species of bats. Again, a species close to my heart. Unfortunately, I've never seen it, not worked on it, but I know others have. And as I've generously borrowed it from Rajesh Puttaswamaya, this particular picture that's available on the net, I hope Rajesh doesn't mind. The Hippocidrus hypophilus, or the kolar leaf-nosed bat, in 2001, when we were doing the assessment, was known to occur in perhaps 3 different bat caves in Kolar and perhaps one other place in Ramnagaram. But we realized soon enough that the Ramnagaram one was not actually this particular species. And eventually, about 5-6 years back, its distribution was narrowed down to occurring only in a single cave in Kolar. And that particular cave is actually in a mountain which is close to the Kolar gold fields. You all have heard of the super hit Kannada movie KGF. That comes from that particular Kola gold field. If somebody is listening and has good contacts with the filmmakers, I think it would be great to call it KLB for Kolar Leaf Nose Bat for a movie instead of KGF. Anyway, um, the point of this particular bat is that it occurs only in a single cave, and there are communities living around it. People who have worked on this bat, especially the Srinivasulus, Chalmala Srinivasulu, his wife Bhargavi Srinivasulu, and their son Aditya Srinivasulu, have over the last 5 to 6 years been making forays into the community, working with them, and have gotten that cave protected today. So it's now with the forest department, and there is some restriction to enter the cave. And so hopefully this particular species, the only location where it is found is protected. We need to still work on its conservation because only cave means there are so many different problems that come with a single location species. And there are only about 200, 250 odd bats in that cave. So we need to study more. We need to understand more about the species, how it uses the habitat, and how the habitat is being used by humans, and therefore what are its prospects of survival over the long term. It's a Alliance for Zero Extinction Species because of its unique position in terms of occurring in a single location. It's vulnerable to extinction, it's critically endangered, and the habitat is irreplaceable. And so it has to be managed properly. The species also coexist with other interesting species of leaf-nosed bat from Madhya Pradesh, which was until recently thought to occur only in a single cave in Madhya Pradesh. That was the Hippocetrus durgadasai, which now happens to occur in this cave also, which means that there's some good news for the two species. Perhaps this particular kolar leaf-nosed bat also is found in other caves, and that needs to be explored. There are some horrible sights that one gets to see, and this is one of those. I've not shown the more juicy pictures, or rather horrible pictures, in terms of what happens in different parts of the country. This is from Nagaland, where the community actually goes and collects bats to eat and for trade. It's on a couple of days in a year, and so the entire cave system is smoked for bats, and as they exit, they're caught, they're clubbed, and eaten or sold or whatever. And so this is a very, very tormenting situation when you're actually there and seeing it. Fortunately, I've not seen it. Unfortunately, it's on Facebook, and you can see a lot of different videos and photographs of this. And this particular photograph is by the person who runs that Facebook channel, Makizo, and you can go check it out. But it's not a very pretty sight. So if you're weak-hearted, I'd rather ask you to avoid watching it. So we have some obvious threats. We have some obvious threats for cave bats. And I'm only referring to them in this particular slide. I'm not looking at any other species of bat. There are several other species that occur outside of caves. Their situations also not that very good, but many a times we don't get to know them or see them because they are not limited by where they occur. They're more free-flying, and therefore their escape routes are many more. Cave bats, unfortunately, do not have that option, and the choices are limited. There's a lot of hunting that happens throughout the country. It's not just in Nagaland. And I've recorded several cave bats being hunted for food. People believe that they're also medicinal. One common belief that we find in southern India is that these cave bats, especially the fruit bats, are good when women have menstrual problems. And the sorry state of affairs is modern medical practitioners, MBBS doctors, recommend this in certain villages, in certain towns around the country, uh, to eat fruit bats as medicine. We've also recorded people using the fat, the oil from the bats, cave bats, as medicine to give a massage, to massage the young ones, the newborns. They believe that it enhances their bone structure. And so, these are some of the beliefs they have. Apart from that, there are also blind beliefs. People do not like to come across a bat. In many instances, in many communities, maybe not the ones that have lived with them, but communities that have moved into forested areas, moved into areas close to caves, have these blind beliefs that bats are bad. And so just seeing one is not good. And so they actively kill them. Of course, there are cultural practices like the one that I just showed you, the previous slide, which again creates or adds to the problems that the bats face in caves. And of course, conspiracy theories. In the recent past, we have had COVID, which has seen a lot of videos on WhatsApp and on social media touted by various different people targeting bats. And so we've come across very many situations where people have actually gone into caves and hunted them, have smoked them, okay, and try to kill as many of those bats as possible. So conspiracy theories rule the roost also, and so we need to have a way of dealing with this. Hunting is one big issue with cave bats, but you also have other issues like people using caves. More and more people have started using caves. Remember the very first bat that I showed you of a cave bat from near Rolapadu? When we went into that cave, we could see these images. We could see uh, pits for smokes, for bonfires and everything else. And when we asked around, said that people come there to pray, and in doing so, smoke the cave. And what used to have lots of bats is now, very, this was again way back in 2001, had very few numbers of them. So smoking bats is harmful for the bats in the long term, in the sense that when you smoke them, when you don't kill them, they get out of the cave. But when it is done often enough, they don't come back. And that is being done for various different reasons. For tourism, people, now it's opened up. Everybody is going to different places, unique places, social media, TikTok places. Tourism is really creating a huge problem to cave bats. Why? Because the cave use, even by local residents, has increased. Guano collection, of course, no longer happens in India because there are not enough bats to accumulate guano in huge quantities for people to extract. There are few instances, but they are few and far between. Most of the caves are used regularly by people for various reasons. And like I said, for religious practices. So again, this is on the rise. Any cave, there are certain sects that believe that caves are homes to certain gods and therefore have religious practices built around that. So these two, hunting and smoking, are two deadly threats to cave bats. I can go on, but I wouldn't like to sort of take up this entire thing because there are people who are working now. There are different communities who are coming together. Like I just told you about how the Srinivas Lus have worked with the local communities. Like how Ravi Shankran worked with the local communities, not only for the edible nest swiftlets, but also for all the other cave denizens, including bats. So he was a champion for all those. And thankfully, Shirish Manchi is walking in his steps. And so we can expect some of those caves to be really good for bats. So there are people working in different parts of the country. And with the speleological initiative that is happening, I think more and more people will actually look at caves as conservation units and start working towards that rather than just tourism and recreational places. More recently, with the amendment of the Wildlife Protection Act that was passed in the Rajya Sabha last month, we have 6 cave bats on Schedule 1 and 2. The Salim Ali's fruit bat and Rowton freetail bat were included way back in 2002, soon after the assessments that we had in 2001, where both those species were recognized as being highly threatened. We now have more information for other species like the Kolar leaf-nosed bat and the Andaman horseshoe bat, and of course the Durgadas bat um, and not so much for the mitred horseshoe bat, but enough for the Wildlife Protection Act to include some of these on these schedules. Because Schedule 1 means the highest protection, Schedule 2 still affords protection, but it allows other things to happen. Nonetheless, looking at this list, I think there is some hope for cave bats, which means that the onus should not just be on the species, but should be on the caves. And I think we should start pushing that because we need to start protecting caves. And so, being optimistic here, we need to go into education, we need to get into community involvement, and of course, citizen science. And this is a very, very important aspect. I'd like to say something here with respect to education. When we do conservation in India, education and outreach and awareness are all considered as add-ons. They're not considered as an integral part of our conservation work. This is where we seem to fail in our conservation work, because education, outreach, and awareness should be the foundation on which conservation activities are built on. And without this, it becomes extremely difficult. We've seen many instances from around the world, and including India, where when people are not involved, when communities are not involved, and they can only be involved when they are reached out to. Education, therefore, becomes the most important first step to take for any conservation action. I hope conservationists and others who are interested in conservation, please start developing your activities based on education as the foundation, which leads to community involvement, which is extremely important. Like we've seen with Ravi Shankaran doing this so successfully. Of course, he had many years of struggle, but he finally did that. He was able to involve them, and he was able to show to the world what India can do in terms of sustainable harvest of a species that had been unsustainably harvested until then. While we can all have our differences of people using a species, what we need to understand is that there are certain communities already doing so. Instead of pointing fingers at them, I think it would best be for us to work with them to help them understand how they can do it sustainably. And I think there are things that we need to sort of involve ourselves more actively in this field. And I'd like to thank Ravi for all the work that he did in Andaman and Nicobar, and of course in other parts of mainland India. His optimism, his involvement with people, his social skills are something to be emulated. Very, very difficult. Definitely, I'm not built the way he was, but I'm trying my best to sort of do this more and more. Which is why in 2005, we started off with the first citizen science activity for fruit bats, documenting fruit bat roosts and documenting their status in different parts of the country. It built up really fast. It's called Project Tiro Count. It started off with just Pteropus medius, the Indian flying fox, but we are opening it up to other species that can be easily seen. So cave bats could be one of them, and would like to encourage you to look up terocount.org for more information. Please visit our website also, and you will get more information on this particular thing. I do not want to sell this more, so I've not added any more information here. But I know that Ravi Shankaran was really gung ho about this. He got a lot of his friends from other parts of Southeast Asia to also participate in this. So what we thought was restricted to Southern Asia, we started getting a lot of people giving us information from Myanmar and Thailand and Cambodia. Although as it went down to Southeastern Asia, the species changed to Pteropus vampirus. So again, Ravi had a good hand in participating and popularizing this particular citizen science initiative of ours. So I would say my biggest wish is that Ravi was still alive. Now, in his absence, my other big wish is that most of us conservationists follow his path, follow his ideology, follow the way he worked on conservation and actually made it work. Of course, every situation is different. It means that we need to apply ourselves in various different ways. But there are takeaways from Ravi's work that we can all benefit from. And I think he would be the happiest to know that people were following in his footsteps. So thank you, Ravi. Thank you all for listening to me. And thank you, Shirish and the Speleological Society for getting me on board into this.
Uh, Thank you, Sanjay, for such a lovely talk and introduction to a lot of bats and things related to them. I'm sure many people must have got benefited from the information what you have shared with us, your knowledge. I think we have some questions in chat box, but in meantime, if somebody wants to ask directly to Sanjay, we can start the question answer session and discussion session. So I'll start with one question which is in the chat box. It's from Anirudh Behl. If you see a bat flying around a street light and grabbing any insects attracted to the light, is it likely to be a pipistel? It's a question.
Depending on where you are, it is likely to be a pupustal, but not really. There are various different insect-eating bats. Pipistils are one of the more common ones. The easiest way of determining whether it is a pipistil or something else is by the size. All the other insect-eating bats are slightly bigger. So you could have several different species, even hippocidrids or rhinelophids sometimes, flying around the lamppost. It could also be scotophilus or taphozous, any of the species, Nyctalis, they could all hunt near lampposts. Again, it depends on which part of the country you're in and where which species dominates.
Okay. And the next question is
Are
from Archana Varan. She would like to know, are bats affected by light pollution and noise pollution?
bats are actually affected by noise pollution, for sure. When you just observe some bats around your place during Diwali, they get either they don't come out or they move away from high noise and high pollution zones. They do get affected. Light pollution, yes, it's more of light pollution not affecting, I don't think they affect bats as much. Perhaps they do. I'm not very sure here. But what I've seen is that light pollution affects their prey. We see a lot of insect prey dwindling in numbers. One of the reasons why there are not many insect species today is because of the light pollution confusing them in their mating rituals or whatever. And so we find a real dip in insect populations, which the bats eat. So directly or indirectly, yes, light pollution does play a role, negative role.
Then I don't think there are any questions in the chat box, but if anybody want to discuss
Hello,
online,
sir. Hello.
yes,
Am I
Yes.
audible?
yes, you are.
Yeah, sir. As you told, kolar leaf bat is in very restricted number, like 250 and all. Won't they cause like inner breeding or something like that? Won't they affect the things like that?
Um, it could, but the point is that we don't know enough yet. What we know is that the kolar leaf nose bat occurs in one cave system. Perhaps they occur in more. Hopefully, they occur in more. As of now, with all the different research that the Srinivaslus have done, they haven't found them in other caves. But you never know. Just like the Automops rotani that I said, used to occur only in a single cave in Belgaum, is now found in Meghalaya and in Southeast Asia. Perhaps there are possibilities of the kolar leaf nose bat also occurring in other places. Fingers crossed. But
Okay, sir.
yeah,
Thank you.
250 individuals inbreeding, perhaps it may be the case if that is the only population. But we again do not know enough about bats. We don't know what is the minimum viable population of bats, if at all there is one for this particular species.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else would like to ask?
Sir,
Yes,
Yes, Shraddha. I think there's one another question here. How to protect bats within urban areas by
okay,
Archana Wan.
okay, yeah,
Um, yeah, uh, it's a very difficult thing. When we talk about communities, when we talk about involving people, I think one of the biggest, most difficult communities are the urbanites. You can work with villagers. We can we can work with uh, people, in forested areas. They're easier to work with. Mind you, they have better awareness than urbanites. This is one of the biggest problems. We find more and more people in urban areas trying to get rid of their fruit bat roosts, and I get so many calls every month from people saying, what do we do? That's so noisy. It creates a lot of problems. There's poop all over the place. It's very, it creates. It's noisy during the day, and with COVID, of course, it'll, bats means they'll release COVID to you. So all these questions keep coming up, and people are constantly looking for ways in urban areas to tear down the tree if they cannot get rid of their bat roots. And we've been successful in some areas in talking to people. Always find the people who support and understand fruit bats or understand wildlife and understand the importance of them and work with them. And perhaps they could be your influencers in the community. Um, Identifying those people is the key. And then, of course, giving them as much material for them to reach out to their community is also very important. So be prepared with both. And again, if you want to do that, if you want materials, please visit our website, zoosprint.org. Um, I've just put it here in the chat box. You will find n number of materials that you can download for free and use in 11 different languages. So feel free. Just go to the search box and search for bat education material. It's published in various different issues, so you can download them.
There is another
Okay.
question from Anirudh Behel. Are bats smoked out of caves only for hunting?
Also to get rid of them. Some people try to get rid of them because they want to use the caves and they don't want these bats hanging above them. So they are smoked out for that reason also, and not necessarily only hunting.
Anybody else? I think Shraddha Kumari or somebody was trying to ask something.
Hello, am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes, yes, Shraddha, please.
Uh, so,
Yes, you are.
Yes.
during the presentation, uh, sir, during the
Shraddha,
presentation,
your
you
voice is breaking.
told about consider species
Shraddha,
which
can you just
you could
type
not
your
identify to
question?
the species level with photograph.
Shraddha, can you type your question, please?
Yes, sir, I will type the question.
Your voice is breaking.
Sir, and meanwhile, I would like to ask that are there any specific conservation policies in our country which are like very specific to bats and their conservation?
Unfortunately, none at all. Again, the Wildlife Protection Act is not a conservation policy.
Yeah.
It's just for
And they're
protecting.
also considered as vermin.
There are no conservation policies. Fortunately, in this new amendment, there are no vermins. They have removed vermins as a list of vermins. So most of the fruit bats, all the fruit bats were included as vermins earlier. Thankfully, now they have all been removed. But yeah, so that's unfortunately, we do not have a conservation policy for any of the cave bats.
So sir, are there any like ongoing efforts for the inclusion of bats in policies, or how as Paleological Association of India and like everybody of us, like how can we contribute and bring them into the policy? So is there any way?
Yeah, the only way is to actually develop a conservation policy. We don't have a national conservation policy. We have a national protection policy. Wildlife Protection Act is a protection policy. Protection is just one of the many strategies under conservation. Just protecting a species does not mean that it is conserved. For the very simple fact that one of the people asked here the question that if the polar leaf-nosed bat, there's just 250 of them in that single cave in Kolar. If they get into some inbreeding issues, it could be a problem for that species. So just protecting that cave does no good for a species that is only 250 or less if inbreeding is a real issue. Or if that particular cave is introduced with some debilitating disease for bats, protection or protecting the cave just does not help. So protection is not the only strategy that one can depend on. So unless we have a conservation act in India, the Wildlife Protection Act can only do so much. And it's good for certain things, like perhaps to keep people from hunting and things like that, but not necessarily for conservation.
Thank you, sir.
So Shraddha has come up with her question in the chat box. Did you try knowing the species of that Hippoceterus species which you could not identify with photograph, and call frequency which was around 80 kilohertz?
Yeah, very interesting question. I've tried. I've asked around. There's only one species that calls at that, and it is fulvus, Hippoceterus fulvus. But this particular species looks very different from fulvus. So I don't know. I thought just to be safe, I'll put it as an unidentified Hippoceterus at this point in time. But again, fulvus also calls at various other frequencies. So I'm really not sure.
I have one question, if Sanjay you allow me, which is in continuation with what sometimes back Dhanusha had asked about the conservation policies. So we don't have conservation policies, but in an existing policy system, are we trying to do some efforts to create the conservation policies? Anything you know, like not only for bats, but bats, caves, or ecosystems, or the endangered species, or sort of a thing.
Well, the only thing I can think of is to look at the Biodiversity Act, and particularly one paragraph that talks about biodiversity conservation, and that is Article 38H. Okay, it's a very small paragraph that says that the National Biodiversity Authority is responsible to ensure the protection or conservation of any threatened species in India. Okay, and that's it. So if you can make use of that to help push for conservation, uh, please do that. So yeah, you could do that. Perhaps in combination with the Wildlife Protection Act, you could have a winner there. We could, perhaps talk more, Shirish, about this.
Yeah, maybe some. Payal has a suggestion. Payal also suggests us to look at spreading, educating, creating pride in our cave bats to aid conservation and create a positive buzz about bats. Like as Sanjay told us that there are a lot of negative beliefs or cultural aspects related to the bats and especially cave dwelling bats and all, which we also often hear about caves. Like people think like caves are the places where ghosts live or where the rakshasas live and all the. So we are also like when working in caves in local areas, it's very difficult to educate people, like take them out from their whatever old cultural beliefs or misbeliefs. So yeah, we have to do more and more education. I agree with Payal, and I'm sure even Sanjay agrees with that.
Absolutely. Like I said, education is the first step. So, when we get into the conservation policies, I think, reaching out to the people and, literally planting ourselves in every cave, at least not inside, but outside of cave, and, reaching out to people would be the first thing that I would say we should do.
Yes, 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 yes. Great. Anybody else has anything to discuss or ask or suggest?
I just wanted to say hello to Sanjay.
Hey,
No
hi, Anjan.
question. It's a long
Long time no
time,
see.
almost more than a decade since we
Yeah,
last met.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Good to
Nice
see
to
you
see you.
here.
Yeah, same here.
I'm in
We
Barampudi
have
also.
we have a question from Archana Varan. I noticed in Korean series about a village declaring as old tree as a national heritage. If we can create a network of old trees as national heritage, it would be good to protect the bat habitats. It's a
I
suggestion
agree
more than
completely with you, Archana.
yeah,
I think it's a very good thing.
it's a
So
good idea.
I'd encourage you to look at the Project Hero account and download the. There is also a link. If someone, I think Usha or someone who's listening in, can you type up the link, the Google form, and you can participate in it. And it's a great way of identifying heritage trees or trees that could be potential heritage sites. So yeah, Usha has just posted this link. Please fill out the form. You can also go to the tirocon.org site and get more information, first of all, on what this entire project is about. And then it would be a great way of identifying heritage trees. And we are losing out quite a few of them. Um, in one of the uh, places where a bat roost near Bidikere in Karnataka on the way from Mysore to Coorg on the highway, that particular roost was mentioned by Shortridge, who was one of the people who studied mammals in Coorg in 1911, 1912. And he's mentioned that the closest bat roost to Coorg is in Bilikere, which is about 70 kilometers away from Coorg, from the Western Ghats. A few years back, with the road expansion, 10 of those trees were brought down. So the entire, all those were heritage trees that were all cut down. And this happened within no time. So one could not take action to save them. And we lost out on a complete roost. And we've lost out actually on that road on 9 different roosts. And also between Bangalore and Mysore, we've lost out on 7 different roosts. So a lot of these trees, yes, they don't actually occur on the roadside even. They're quite inside, but trees get the first axe anyway in a road expansion.
We have a small suggestion from a Barbel Virgil, who belongs to US Bureau, International Union of Speleology Bureau, and also she is a part of the Biology Commission of UIS. And Barbel suggests maybe the Cave Animal of the Year campaign can be just one little step in the education programs. Thank you for this great overview of bats in India and all of your efforts. Enjoyed your much the large variety with best paleo regards from German Speleological Federation. So Barbel is one of the persons, actually is the person who mooted this international cave animal idea in US, and she's doing it from 2009 onwards. I have recently joined her in a biology commission to support her, and soon India will be having its first cave animal, national cave animal, and definitely we are also campaigning for the international cave animal campaign, cave animal. And as we started in the beginning, that bats are now international cave animal of the year as UIS recognizes. So Babal, I think you missed the initial part. Actually, this talk is also related to the International Cave Animal Campaign, and that's why I thought Sanjay will be the right person to speak about, since he's related to bats and also related to Dr. Ravi Shankaran.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Barbel. And, I'd like to actually, perhaps I'll get your email ID from Shirish. And Shirish, my offer from our organization is that we'd love to work with the speleological, I can't get that
Association
word
of
out,
India.
Association of India.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And because education is our forte,
Right.
we can definitely work on that. And I think it's a great suggestion that Babul has given here, and we'll work towards that, Babul. Thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thank you, Sanjay, for your support. Yeah, we'll speak about it later.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else would like to discuss anything related to the talk or bats or caves? So I just hand it over to Dhanusha for the final comments and closing. Dhanusha, can you please?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Take up? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Dhanusha. I'm part of the Speleological Association of India team. So I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Sanjay for such a informative webinar. We believe that there couldn't have been a more better way to remember Dr. Shankaran. This webinar is dedicated to Dr. Ravi sir. I also thank all the participants for attending the webinar. And also I've mentioned the feedback link in the chat box. So I request everyone to give us their feedback. Thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay.
Thank you.
And thank you all the participants.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks
Sure.
for a nice, informative talk. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks,
I've also
Babul.
shared the YouTube channel link over here. So if anybody wants to see our past webinars, we have the recordings in our YouTube channel.
Hi, Babul.
Hi,
Uh,
thank you. Was so great.
nice,
Thank you
nice
very
to
much.
see you. Thanks a lot for staying with us for this whole hour.
Yeah, great suggestion. And I've just told Shirish that we can perhaps work together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Great. Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you
Bye bye.
so much.
Thank you,
Bye.
Sanjay.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye bye.